Uh-oh.
Well, if we want to, we can let our guests know that we had some technical difficulties, but we're up and running.
I think we have gigabit, huh?
Nobody's watching now. Okay. All right, so I'll admit our two guests here. Okay, and you should be ready to roll then.
Okay, for those who are watching, good evening. My name is Steve Bachmiller. I'm the city zoning administrator. Sitting around the table are Kathy Marr, the director of planning and code administration, Debbie Calhoun, our recording secretary, and Paul Falk is our IT person for today. We have the various members of the board present, all 6 of them. At this point, I'm just going to give folks a brief overview. This is the first time we've done a virtual meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals. So we're kind of feeling our way through this. So do please bear with us. We do have a couple of administrative things to handle on the front end of this in order for this all to be legal and legit. That includes some amendments to our bylaws. So with that, I'll turn it over to our chairman, Mr. Katika.
Thanks, Steve. Good evening, everybody. Our board members, I'll introduce everybody tonight real quick. Myself, I'm the chair, Brian Katika. We have Jim Stauffer, Greg Deck, George Newman, Jordy, Janice Kelsch, and Aaron Smith. Our board secretary, Debbie Calhoun, and our zoning administrator, Steve Bachmiller, are with us tonight. The decisions of cases heard tonight are based on general and specific criteria as enumerated in the Hagerstown Land Management Code. This is an administrative proceeding. As such, it will be conducted just as if it were a court of law, except that we will not follow as strictly the rules of evidence. Everyone who wishes to be heard on a particular case will be, to the extent our technology allows us tonight. Each of the cases will be heard in the order that they have been filed with the board. For procedure tonight, after we get through our administrative tasks, the procedure for the hearings will be, we will first hear from the applicant, then all witnesses in favor of the application, all witnesses in opposition to the application, and then the applicant will have an opportunity to make final remarks, including any rebuttal to opposition statements. We'll then take the case under advisement. Typically, if we feel capable of doing so tonight, we will deliberate and have motion, second vote. And if so, then we'll issue a decision within 45 days. That's our standard practice. Everybody is welcome to stay after and listen to our deliberations, but the discussion at that point is limited to board members and staff. Right to appeal. Within 30 days after the date of the written decision and order, is provided by the board. Any party who participated in the hearing and those aggrieved by the decision may appeal to the circuit court. Rules today, only remarks that we will consider are those that are given from the witness chair under oath. And we ask that you confine remarks to things pertinent. Now tonight, before we get into our 2 cases, we have some administrative items to go over. I believe the first is our changes to the rules of procedure. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, just as a point of order, we have perfect attendance amongst our regular members this evening. Aaron Smith is our new designated alternate. So first, welcome, Aaron. And just when it comes to votes at this point, since we do have our 5 regular members, Aaron cannot vote tonight. However, it's actually very good that he's here listening in as kind of an education as a new member, because this is his first meeting. But we do have all 5 of our regular members in attendance and will be voting. So,
thank you. Due to the national emergency and the issues that have caused us to be able to handle this by remote audio and video tonight, we have amended our the Board of Zoning Appeals rules of procedures, and they include. Let's see, at the back, all the board members received a copy of this. Do I need to read all this, Steve?
No.
Okay. If the board members have all read these, they pertain to the declaration of emergency, automatic expiration within 45 days after the mayor of the city of Hagerstown officially ends the civil emergency, unless sooner revised, amended, and or extended by the Board of Zoning Appeals by a majority vote of all board members. The rules remain in effect. Prior to that, online meetings are permitted, minimum requirement for participation. They have to at least have audio connection. If they don't have video, that's okay, but they have to have audio. Public attendance is prohibited from attending in person, and board attendance is discouraged as well. That's why we're all online tonight. And then there will be a recording maintained for a period of 6 months after deliberations. I would recommend that we keep this on the books rather than have to go back perhaps next year when flu season comes around again. I've heard some issues that this thing may not just be this one-time event.
All right, Mr. Chairman, what I would recommend, if we want to do that, that's perfectly fine. But I would recommend that for the purposes of tonight's meeting was just adopt these rules to get this meeting under our belt, and then we can craft some revised language for you to make it more of a long-term or permanent thing for your next meeting.
Okay, great. That sounds like a good idea, good approach. Okay, so having said all that and leaving off any extensions of these rules or permanent effect of these rules, as they have been written and amended due to the national emergency dated April 22nd, 2020, I'll entertain a motion to adopt these amended rules of procedure.
Mr. Chairman, I will make that motion to approve the procedures as written. The
Thank you,
emergency
Greg.
procedures. Yes.
Do I have a second?
I will second.
Okay, Jim and or Janice, and any further discussion from the board? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. All right, unanimous. Thank you. Let's see. Election of officers. Since this is the first, I think this is the first hearing we've had this year. And so I'll entertain a motion for an election of the chair. Anybody want to nominate themselves to be the chair?
I nominate you, Brian.
You want to nominate me? Okay. I'm okay with that. All right. A second?
And who seconded? Was there a second?
Who second?
I will second.
Greg seconds it.
This is
Okay.
Greg.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I will abstain from voting myself in. All right, we'll proceed now to the appeals. Our first case is number Z 2020-02. Mr. Bachmiller, if you could give us a summary.
Chairman, before we do that, I want to make sure that we have the applicant on board. We're working on that at the moment, so please stand by.
All right, thanks.
And there we are.
Hey, Mr. Chair, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, your case has just been called by the chair. At this point, if you could just identify yourself for the record, please.
I am Jake Bear, owner of Old Town Development, which is the owner of 607 West Washington Street. And beside me is Will Selman.
Okay,
Okay,
this is case
And,
2020-02.
go ahead.
Okay, this case is 2020-02. The applicant is Jake Bear. Property is located in the commercial local zoning district. Property is located at 607 West Washington Street, with parking to be provided in the St. Mark's Lutheran Church parking lot on the north side of Washington Avenue. The request is a special exception to establish a brew pub and a variance to reduce the required number of off-street parking spaces to 0 at the property designated at 607 West Washington Street, which is in CL Commercial Local. This application is being made for the reasons that under Article 4, Section U8A 1 through 7, and Section Z, a brew pub is a special exception use in the CL zoning district. And Article 4, Section F2C, which says any special exception granted by the Board of Zoning Appeals shall only be approved when the use is found to be in accordance with off-street parking requirement. Section O, which is 1 space per 50 square feet customer floor area for a brew pub. This request is for a reduction of 40 spaces to 0 is made if the church parking lot cannot be used. And I'm going to step away from the actual staff report here and just give you a little bit of context. The variance was submitted as essentially as a backup because if you all determine that the use of this church parking lot can be used, then the variance is not applicable. But if you determine that it can't be, you can still move forward with the special exception, but they would need a variance to the parking requirement. So that's where it's at. So it's kind of a, maybe you look as you go through your hearing, maybe they'll need the variance, maybe they won't, but it's been applied for if needed. Going into your staff report for a special exception, you have general criteria for special exceptions to be granted. There you have not much in the way of comments from staff on that one written into your staff report. There has been a letter of permission provided by St. Mark's Lutheran Church for the use of their parking facility. So you do have something to file for the second property involved in this showing property owner consent. For the variances, I'll just direct you to the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3 of your staff report regarding the granting of variance. And then there's a peculiarity, which I alluded to here a little bit earlier in your deliberations tonight. And what I'm going to do, rather than summarize, I'm going to read it verbatim into the record in case there's anybody watching who hasn't had access to the staff report. And this is an interpretation of the ordinance. The church's parking lot is located in the RMED residential medium density zoning district. This district permits houses of worship by right and by special exception, depending on the situation. The parking lot is accessory to and serves a use permitted in that district. However, a brew pub is not a permitted use in the district in which the parking lot is located. Section 05A of the zoning ordinance states, and I quote, in calculating total parking space requirements, spaces located on a lot other than that lot on which the principal use is located may be included, provided that such parking is within 500 feet of the nearest boundary of the lot on which the use is located, and the permanent availability of such spaces for the use in question is documented by the applicant. The application raises the question of whether a parking lot in a residential district can be used for a nearby commercially zoned use. In this case, can the existing church parking lot in a residential zoning district be dual purpose to also provide parking for a commercial business in a nearby commercial zoning district? There's no specific prohibition of such in the parking requirements. However, use variances are not permitted by state law, and the ordinance is an exclusionary ordinance, meaning if something is not listed as permitted, it's presumed to be prohibited. Since this application is being brought to you through special exception variance process regardless, and any determination made by me, the zoning administrator, on this issue would be right for appeal to this body, either by the applicant or an opponent. Staff defers to the board in determining whether providing parking for a use in a commercial district may be permitted in a nearby residential district if permissible by the terms of the zoning ordinance. When weighing this issue, this board will need to consider that whatever determination it makes will be applicable beyond this case to all permitted and special exception uses. It will not apply solely to this case. Should the board determine that providing parking for a commercially zoned use in a nearby residential district is not permissible, it does not prevent the board from continuing to hear the special exception and variance applications, but it would need to evaluate those requests through the lens of St. Mark's lot not being permitted to be used for the parking for the commercial use to mitigate the impacts of the variance. If the board finds that using the church lot is permissible, the variance request is moot because the parking is being provided. The variance was filed in case the board determines the church lot cannot be used. The shortest route from the church parking lot to the brew pub is the alley that runs behind St. Mark's Church and is adjacent to residences. Measures should be taken to direct patrons to walk around the front of the church through Washington Square rather than disturb the adjacent residential area with commercial foot traffic, presumably at least some of whom will be loud late at night, leaving a tavern environment. Should this application be approved with the use of St. Mark's lot, and that lot should no longer be available in the future, it completely changes the circumstances under which the special exception and variance were granted, and the use could not then be in compliance with testimony provided in this hearing. This second condition that we'll recommend below makes that clear to the applicant and future owners or operators. So now I move on to a section on conditions of approval. The board may prescribe appropriate and specific conditions and safeguards, including location, construction, maintenance, and operation in conformity with this ordinance. Violation of such conditions and safeguards when made part of the terms of under the variance granted shall be a violation of this ordinance. And that's from the ordinance itself. Should the board determine that the special exception and variance and determine that the availability of parking in the St. Mark's Church parking lot is permitted and can be used to mitigate the impact of the parking variance, staff recommends the following conditions in addition to the standard in accordance with applicant's testimony that you always put in. The conditions are as follows. Should St. Mark's parking lot no longer be available to provide parking for this proposed use, the use shall cease operation and comply with the zoning ordinance. Compliance will be in the form of 1, concluding the brew pub use, 2, operating without the use of the church parking lot if that is compliant with the zoning ordinance at such time in the future as this occurs, 3, obtaining a new special exception and variance with or without a new off-site parking proposal, or 4, other means in conformance with the zoning ordinance at the time the issue arises. And then recommended condition 3, should the use of the church lot be approved, staff also recommends a condition that requires signage in the brew pub and at the church parking lot directing patrons around the front of the church. And then the city, if that moves forward, the city will also look at the possibility of the city actually signing the alley, saying no through pedestrian traffic or something along those lines. As far as recommendations from boards, we received nothing from the Planning Commission, nothing from the HTC. We have not gotten anything from the Board of Traffic and Parking that I'm aware of. And that's it. So, and then we do have a couple of letters that have been submitted, Mr. Chairman. I will enter those into the record either when it comes time for those in support or those in opposition.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we will begin by first having the applicants raise your right hands, please. Yes, thank you. And repeat after, well, I'll say it. Do you each solemnly promise and declare under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you are about to give this board shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, great. They both have said they do. And normally I would say, please be seated. Okay. As Mr. Bachmiller pointed out, we're looking at perhaps both a special exception and a variance. Why don't you go ahead and give us a summary of your proposal and let us know what your own words, what you're trying to do here.
Thank you very much. It's sort of, I guess, an honor to participate in this online experiment on here. My name is Will Selman. I am a consulting urban planner working with Mr. Bear on various projects. Just a quick background, I've got 30 years experience as both a staff planner in equivalent to Mr. Bachmiller's position, and as a private consultant. I've also chaired a city planning commission as well. So I understand the work that you're going through right now. I'm going to go through introduction of our request, a little history of the property and so forth, and then describe how we are, with our request, meeting the intention of the ordinance. The property, as you can see in the photograph, is located at 607 West Washington Street, zone commercial local, adjacent to medium density residential. In fact, the adjacent properties were rezoned from that just a few years ago. The property in question is mixed use, 3-story residential above the commercial space. There are several residential units there now. The building takes up 100% lot coverage. So that's the complicating factor here. A little history: the building was originally built in 1900 and was once used as a new car sales showroom. Most recently, it was used as a furniture store. We are asking for the possibility of using this as a brew pub. As mentioned by staff in an email, this is to be considered as a restaurant regarding as far as the special exception definition is concerned. We are looking at approximately 1,500 square feet of space, which turns out to be about 30 parking spaces, given the fact that you're looking at 50 square feet, one space per 50 square feet. We see that this is an appropriate amenity, both for the neighborhood and as a link between the residential neighborhood and the downtown. Regarding the variance for parking, 100% lot coverage does not allow for any on-site parking. Is some adjacent parking on the adjacent site, as I mentioned just a second ago. It's under common ownership. Mr. Bear owns both properties. Those spaces are currently being used by the residents up above the potential brew pub. As I mentioned, the 1,500 square feet of the proposed use would require 30 parking spaces per ordinance. The way in which we are meeting the ordinance regarding the special exception, the concept of a brew pub restaurant is very much in keeping with the intent of the various elements of the comprehensive plan. The introduction to the plan states the following. There's a desire to reconfigure underutilized buildings and land to accommodate residential, commercial business, and mixed-use development so that the city can attract new residents, business, and enhance its fiscal foundation and economic base. The comprehensive plan also makes reference to concepts such as placemaking, developing linkages between downtown and adjacent neighborhoods. And that's precisely what this property does, is link the neighborhood to the downtown. The Sustainable Communities Plan as well, updated in 2017, seeks to promote adaptive reuse of historic buildings, mixed uses, and to create additional amenities. So again, the location of the property acts as a transitional gateway between the downtown and the adjacent neighborhood. Regarding parking, it's been mentioned that we are looking for the variance is in place in case the board does not find that the parking at the St. Mark's Church is not available. We do have, as you have received, a letter of support from the church making all of its parking space available. We're looking for 30 spaces. The church parking lot has available 75. The connection, as mentioned, between the property and the parking lot, it's about 225 feet directly when the alley access is used. And if pedestrians were directed to go around the church, it's still well under 500 feet when accessed around the front of the church. So we feel that the use of the church parking lot meets the needs of the ordinance. And so it's not really clear that this variance is even necessary, but we put it in just in case. There are the 6 requirements, 6 questions that any Board of Zoning Appeals must review, and I'll go through each of those in the way in which we feel we meet them. The first, would compliance with regulations unreasonably prevent the owner from using property? The size of the lot and the 100% lot coverage of the building preclude any on-site parking, as mentioned. The provision of parking would actually exceed the size of the entire lot. Number two, is this the minimum reasonable need to overcome the conditions? Again, the parking lot contains more than double of our needs. The church parking lot contains 75 spaces. We're asking for 30. In a sense, this is not so different from the way in which a downtown structured parking deck might operate, serving a variety of different users in an area. Number three, the question number three, how does enforcement of this provision deprive the property owner from uses commonly enjoyed by others in the same district? The city of Hagerstown is peppered with a lot of buildings in this same condition and with the same limitations. Given the typical configurations and lot coverage, the majority, if not all, similar buildings would require such a variance or need to find off-site parking. Again, the church lot contains more than enough for what it is that we're asking for. This variance does not confer special treatment. Off-site parking, again, is not disallowed under the ordinance. Given typical lot sizes and configurations, again, the majority of similar properties would need to find the same relief. The variance request does not deprive other properties from seeking similar arrangements. Again, the church would have, even if we were given all 30 of the spaces we're looking for, there are still a number of other spaces that would be available. Has the owner created the conditions which limit this? And certainly no changes in lot configuration or the building have taken place. The building is historic and predates the zoning ordinance by a number of decades. The proposed use is permitted by special exception within the district. The standards for the amount of parking are not those of the applicant. The applicant isn't asking for a particular amount of parking one way or the other. These are the standards of the ordinance. So the applicant has not created that conflict. And the final question, how is the variance not contrary to the intent of the zoning ordinance or injurious to the neighborhood? The intent of the zoning is to implement the comprehensive plan. The site location within the neighborhood, adjacent to the neighborhood in downtown, appropriately zoned as a gateway between the two. The proposed use is permitted within the local commercial district, again, as a special exception. And again, the zoning ordinance is intended to meet the goals of the comprehensive plan, which throughout the document is calling for the adaptive reuse of historic buildings and the creation of new amenities. Responding to some particular staff comments provided by Mr. Bachmiller, the dual purpose across zoning districts. It has been stated that this would amount to a use variance, which is not permitted. However, the use of the parking lot itself is not being changed. It remains a parking lot. While it is an accessory use to the church, it will still be used for parking. The use of the property in question is being requested but by special exception, not by variance. The concern about setting a precedent, we would say that in a sense, a precedent is sort of already set in the way in which a downtown structured parking structure would provide off-street parking to a number of different uses within walking distance, even across zoning districts. And similarly, a lot of communities will often require shared off-street parking to reduce the number of curb cuts, for instance. And so that might result in shared parking across properties as well. The possibility of St. Mark's Church lot becoming unavailable, that is an understandable concern, but we don't see that as an institution, the church is not going anywhere in the foreseeable future. If that is the case, then certainly, if necessary, the arrangement, the parking arrangement in the new situation would have to be renegotiated, but that's understandable in any case. The conditions of approval that Mr. Bachmiller outlined regarding the operations of the church parking lot appear to be reasonable and workable. I think Mr. Bear has a concern a little bit about the access through the public right of way, the alley.
Yeah, concerning the alley, it is a public alley. I've had discussions with a few people about it, including the pastor at the church. Interestingly, that alley is used for unsavory activities and currently. And one way to decrease the unwanted behaviors is to shine light into that alley. And what I mean by that is to increase the activity, increase foot traffic. And it's interesting, once again, I've talked to the pastor about it, and he mentioned that his own churchgoers avoid that alley, which also, that should not be the case. An alley should not be considered this scary thing. And it's actually a very short alley. It's not a long, it's not dark. But anyway, I think we should reconsider that, because it is a straight shot. When you are in the parking lot, you visually can see, my building. You can see 607 West Washington Street, which is a good thing. And I think, so then the issue of foot traffic, right? So recently, it wasn't that long ago, I visited, actually I visited a few brew pubs in Frederick. They have, I think, possibly a dozen right now. And I visited 3 and sort of in study and preparation for this project. And the people that I found inside of these clubs were family operations. There were children, there were young adults, older adults. It was a very pleasant, it was lovely. I was actually surprised. It was not a dark, seamy pub. So actually, so anyway, so that's my point. I think we should reconsider the alley. I don't think we should automatically not include that as a rite of passage from the parking lot to the building. Thanks.
So that essentially wraps up our thoughts on this project. Just in sort of summary, I know that this is a process that the board has to look at from a legal perspective, but I like to sort of make an analogy. I like to do a lot of baking. And again, the zoning ordinance is intended to implement the vision of the comprehensive plan. And you can sort of think of going back to the baking analogy, imagine that your comprehensive plan is calling for something good for the city. It's calling for a chocolate cake. The zoning ordinance is equivalent to the recipe. And what we're asking for is some tweaks to the recipe, because right now we see that what the recipe, what the zoning ordinance is asking for is a little bit too much flour, not quite enough sugar, no cocoa at all. That's the sort of approach that I take when I think about how a zoning ordinance applies to the vision that you're trying to create for the city. And so we feel that this project is an enhancement and a fulfillment of what the comprehensive plan is trying to achieve. And I think that's
Actually,
it.
I want to tag on the idea of it's a little bit of a sidestep, but the issue of craft. Keep in mind when you do a brew pub, people, it's like going to a winery versus showing up at a wine store, right? If you go to a winery, the craft is so essential to the experience, and that is the same thing that happens at a brew pub. And it's not about crazy behavior. I hear comments that, what about the people that'll stumble out of there? That's in my experience is not what happens at this type of a location, at this type of. I think that's it. Thanks for allowing us to participate in this.
Thank you.
I assume there might be questions.
All right. Is everybody back on? Unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anyone in opposition online?
Mr. Chairman, before we do that, I do have a letter of support that I need to enter into the
Okay.
record.
Okay.
I have a letter here we received in our office 2 days ago. It says, "Dear Planning and Zoning Department, addressing the microbrewery to be established in our building at 607 West Washington Street Apartments. All tenants are in support of the prospect. It is felt that such a business presence on the street would improve our neighborhood. We greatly hope for a larger area of commerce in the West End. Each tenant residing in our beloved building has signed this letter in support of the microbrewery. We hope to see a new business coming to our community soon. Thank you." Signed, Caitlin Howard, apartment 301. Another signature that I cannot read, apartment 301. Alex Gilt, it looks like, apartment 303. Another signature that I cannot read, apartment 303. And it looks like a Tracy Wells at apartment 302. And also, just want to enter into the record the letter of support from the church. You can stand by on that. Can I borrow yours? Yeah. It's not mine. Okay, church letter from St. Mark's Church, dated March 30th. Addressed to me, Mr. Bachmiller. This letter is sent regarding the proposed brew pub at 607 West Washington Street. In my capacity as pastor of St. Mark's Lutheran Church, 601 Washington Avenue, I offer our full support of this project in both its concept and its practical requirements. The proposal, as we understand it, is the development of a brew pub and historic mixed-use property at 607 West Washington Street, located directly across the street from our church sanctuary. This project will include an approximately 2,500 square feet of customer space, resulting in the need of 50 off-street parking spaces. Regarding the parking requirements of the zoning ordinance, approximately 50 off-street spaces will be needed. The ordinance does not require that such spaces be on site. Therefore, our available spaces will easily satisfy the ordinance requirements. We are happy to provide our support to this project. Specifically, we will make our parking lot for the use of patrons of the proposed brew pub. Our parking lot located on Washington Avenue includes 75 parking spaces less than 250 feet from the proposed project. We will make available these 75 spaces for use by the brew pub for their needs. The exception to this offer being during Sunday church service hours. We view the proposed brew pub as a positive addition to the community and are happy to lend our support towards success. And then I have a letter in opposition, which when you get into the opposition section, I'll read that one into the record.
Okay, thank you. All right. Opposition. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to the?
And we have two
application?
parties that have been pre-cleared to speak on this behalf. So I'm going to turn that over to Paul to get them connected.
Thank you.
Okay, Miss Churchill Klein, can you hear us?
Yes, sir.
Okay, welcome to the BZA meeting. I'll turn you over to the chairman.
Good
Ms.
evening.
Klein, I will ask you to, well, I can't see you raise your right hand, but do you solemnly promise and declare under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give this board shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Go ahead. Give me your address for the record.
My address is 608 West Washington Street, Hagerstown, Maryland. It is adjacent to 607 West Washington Street.
Okay, thank you. What would you like to tell us tonight?
I am in opposition to not only the parking variance, but of course the site being used for micropub. Several different reasons. One is we also own 606 West Washington Street. The alleyway that runs between our house and the church, it does have heavy foot between the public and the patrons that would come out of that micropub. I understand that Mr. Baer thinks that, it's not a dark, scary, place if we had more public access to the alleyway. I can assure you, for one that has worked at bars and micropubs, that when those patrons come out of there, they're going to be going through that alleyway and then crossing 3 lanes of heavy traffic and high-speed traffic through that area. So my main concern is the patrons and their safety. And then, of course, our neighborhood. It's not the greatest of neighborhoods. We've had crime less than 50 feet away from the front door of 607 West Washington. There was a shooting last September that killed a 19-year-old kid. I really do worry about the safety of our neighborhood. You're bringing in more people, and the parking variance, it's not going to work. My biggest question is who is going to enforce these variances?
Okay. I can't answer that question. I think that there are city agencies that have the responsibility to enforce these items, including the zoning agency, but
Mr. Chairman, I could probably give a little clarification on that.
yes, please.
Just so we are all clear, the variance was applied for one purpose. And that is if this body decides that the church lot cannot be used for parking for this business because the zoning district is a residential zoning district, that's when the variance kicks in. The variance is not to allow the church lot to be used. The variance is if you determine that the church lot can't be used, then they have no parking, and therefore they need a variance. So if the variance is approved, what that means is that there's going to be no parking provided for this, and the parking for the use would be finding spaces on the street as they may be available. So that's one of the things I worried about the way this is structured, and that's why I tried to write it as detailed as possible into the staff report. So everybody's very clear on this. If the church lot, this body determines is acceptable, there is no variance needed because the parking is being provided. It's not a variance to use the residential zoning district. This body needs to determine whether or not that church lot can be used, yes or no, in the R-Med zoning district. If the answer is yes, the parking is provided. If you determine that it's not permissible to use that lot because of the residential zoning district, then they have no parking. And therefore they need a variance in order to do the use, and the parking would be on street as they can find it.
All right. And so that, if I can ask one question with regard, or make a statement with regard to that, that means that if the parking lot is not used, if we decide that they cannot use the parking lot, and we approve the special exception for them to operate the brew pub in that location, the building, there is no prohibition against them using publicly available spaces on the streets.
That's correct, and that's the purpose
It
of
would
the
not-
variance.
Yeah. Just because they don't have parking on site doesn't mean they can't still operate.
One of the requirements of the special exception is that it has to provide parking in accordance with the ordinance, but it does not preclude them from obtaining a variance. So if you say that they can't use the church lot because it's in a residential zoning district, without a variance, they got to find 30 parking spaces or whatever the requirement is in that zoning, that commercial zoning district, which they're not going to do. So the purpose of the variance is to eliminate the requirement for providing parking, off-street parking. And then again, they'd be operating a brew pub and the patrons would be finding parking where they can find it. I hope that was clear.
As clear as it can be. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Klein. Is there, I believe you said that there was another individual who wanted to testify in opposition?
Yes, Mr. Robert Eves, we're going to patch him through here now. Mr. Eves, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, you're with the Board of Zoning Appeals. I'll turn you over to the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Eves. If you would please respond to the following statement. Do you solemnly promise and declare under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you are about to give this board shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. If you would state your name, including the spelling of your last name and your address, please.
My name is Robert Eves, E-V as in Victor, E-S. I'm at 612 West Washington Street.
Thank you. What would you like to tell us tonight?
I have some concerns over the parking. I can understand a variance for 1, 2, 3, 5 parking spaces, but a variance for 30 parking spaces indicates to me that the site is not suitable for the type of business they want to put in there. I also have a concern over parking provided at St. Mark's Lutheran. I'm going to end up being the one parking at St. Mark's Lutheran and having to walk to my home. I don't know who's going to monitor or police the situation to see that the patrons of the brew house are the ones parking at St. Mark's. I'm sure there's no way that you can control that situation. Those of us who have lived here for any period of time have all suffered damage to our vehicles, keying, broken windows, having our vehicles broken into, which necessitates the desire to park in front of your property so that you can monitor your vehicle. I've paid to replace my sidewalk and curb. It would be nice if the city would give a owner-occupied permit, perhaps even charge a small fee for the privilege of parking in front of your residence. I'm responsible for keeping my sidewalk clean, clear of snow, and when I clean a space out for parking, am I to come home and find it taken by somebody that's over at the tap house? It just doesn't seem like a suitable spot for this type of business. There's too much crime in the area, and I just see it getting worse. So that's some of my concerns.
Understand. Okay, thank you for your comments. I appreciate it from both you and Ms. Klein. Is that everyone, Steve?
Yes, do you want to ask if any of the members of the board have any questions of these applicants?
Any questions?
I do have a question about the residents that are currently at the building at 607, and it's 5 residents
That's correct. On the third floor, that's right.
on the 3rd floor. So all of their parking spaces are out front?
So in front of the building, we actually have 3 parking spaces, street parking spaces in front of the building. And I have the adjacent lot, which, you know, depending on how you configure it, you could have 10 to 15 parking spaces on my lot.
So how many of the residents currently have vehicles parked on the street that's in the building?
I mean, there's no need for them to park on the street. If they park on the street, I presume it's their choice, but they certainly do not need to.
But if their parking spaces, I mean, if they've been there a while, if their parking spaces are being compromised by, other cars parked.
Yeah, so, okay, to that point, I'm definitely going to assure that my residential tenants have parking on my property.
That they would be secure, that would be secured parking and not compromised.
Their parking will not be compromised, that's correct.
Okay.
Does
that
anybody
would-
have anyone have any questions specifically for Mr. Eves or Ms. Klein with regard to their concerns?
I mean, would you like for me to respond to Mr. Eves?
No.
Not yet, not yet.
Okay.
Any board members, any questions for them?
Well, Steve, I'm concerned about this state law thing. Is there anyone that can give a little more clarification on this state law? I think that, precludes using the church parking lot if this state law, if we find that there is some prohibition here. I don't know if I fully understand what's being said here in this paragraph.
Okay, the state enabling law is pretty general, but it specifically says that you cannot do use variances. In other words, somebody can't apply to this body through and ask for a variance to put and I'll use a ridiculous example, an atomic power plant in the middle of a residential zoning district. Okay. You can only approve, well, this body doesn't even have to approve a use permitted by right. People can just do that. The second thing is a special exception use. Uses that are conditional, you go through this process on a regular basis. It's limited to those uses that the ordinance says that you can entertain. You just can't entertain a request for any use in any zoning district through a variance process. So unless the ordinance says that you could apply for X use in that zoning district, beyond that would be considered a use variance. So the question is going to be in your deliberations, whether or not the parking for this pub is part of the pub use. And as such, is that permitted in the RMED residential zoning district? That's going to be what's part of your deliberations.
Thank you.
Assuming that there's no questions for the two persons in opposition from the board, we'll move back to the applicants and allow you some time to
Mr. Chairman, before we do that, I just want to enter into the record one letter of opposition. And that's actually was submitted by Mr. Eves, but I'll read it into the record. It was submitted on February 27th in reference to the proposed Tap House Brewery being located at 607 West Washington Street. I would like to imply my concerns. Parking is very much a concern for the residents on the street and surrounding streets. As property owners, we are responsible for the maintenance and replacement of curbs and sidewalks that border our property, yet we are not guaranteed the privilege of parking in front of our tax-generating address. Those of us who have lived here for any length of time have all suffered damage to our vehicles by keying, break-in, broken windows, etc., which deems it necessary to park in close proximity of our homes so our vehicles can be monitored. It would be an incentive to the downtown home market if owner-occupied parking was guaranteed. Please consider the needs of the older residents of the city and the need to have parking available close to their homes when deciding on the location of the Tap House Brewery. So I'll enter that one into the record. And that's all of the letters in support or opposition that I have been submitted to this office. And just, Mr. Chairman, just as a reminder, if you have any questions for me as zoning administrator, such as what Mr. Deck just did regarding process, the law, etc., please ask those of me before you go into deliberations, because I'm not supposed to participate in your deliberative process.
Thank you. Okay, let's jump back to the applicants to, if you'd like to take the opportunity to respond to the comments in opposition and or add anything to your presentation.
Okay. Yeah, the concerns of the community or the two persons that have stated their opposition. So it was not that long ago. In fact, roughly 6 months ago, 613 West Washington Street. That building there, that garage there was used as an automobile restoration facility. It was active, buzzing, a lot of people. Within a couple weeks after that business closed and relocated to a larger place, they outgrew the space. Within 2 weeks, my buildings were graffitied. And that would not have taken place if there was activity on and around those buildings. I'm not trying to tell you something new, but it goes without saying that the more activity that you have, the less likely you will actually, of people walking, up and down the sidewalk and interacting and partaking in an urban environment the way it was meant to be, the less likely you're going to have the misbehaviors that have been stated. And I don't think there would be the likelihood of somebody patronizing this establishment, keying a car. I just think it's unheard of. I'm not aware of any examples. And then concerning the parking issue, Mr. Selman may want to make another comment on that. Thank you.
Well, I would just want to reiterate our position that the idea of Mr. Brockmiller is correct. The state requirements, state law says that a change by variance is not permitted. The parking lot will remain a parking lot, whether or not it is subsidiary to one activity or the other. So that's really not a change in our view. Just to sort of give a larger perspective on parking requirements, I know that your zoning ordinance is your zoning ordinance, but just to give a sense of how other communities operate in a similar situation. The city of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I was chairman of the city planning commission there, sat on the commission for 12 years. Outside of the central business district, eating and drinking establishments, one parking space per 100 square feet. Here in Alexandria, Virginia, where I currently reside, the neighborhood of Arlandria is quite similar in its feel and intensity to this location in Hagerstown. The standard for restaurant parking is one space per 200 square feet. So these are different communities. They've made different decisions, and not to say that Hagerstown needs to change its requirements or standards or anything, but just keep in mind that other communities have half the requirement, or in Alexandria's case, requirement for parking in a similar setting. So we feel that the impact of using the parking lot at the church, which is again very, very close, alleviates any problem that the citizens and residents might have regarding the loss of their parking. That's all regarding that.
So I'll make another comment. I live in Alexandria as well, and it's not uncommon for somebody to walk 4 blocks, 5, 6 blocks to park in order to go to an establishment on King Street. It's something that is a common sight, and it's a good thing. So I know it's not quite that sentiment there. If typically, people want to park closer, but in an urban environment, it's not uncommon for folks to park blocks, several blocks away. I do think, and you heard it from the residents there that there is an issue of crime and unsavory behavior. Well, I think we're all trying to, and I think, and in my discussions with the pastor, we're trying to up the game, lift the standard a little bit. We're trying to make movement in the right direction, and we do think that this will do that. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I believe that is going to close our.
I have one more question, Brian.
Sure.
Brian, I have one more
Yes,
question.
go ahead.
With respect to the church offering up 75 spaces, and with respect to, except for Sunday during their services. Now, I know that the business is deemed to be open on Sunday between 12 and 5, is that correct? But we don't know what time the church services are over on Sunday. We don't know how long they run.
Okay, so,
If more than 30 spaces will be utilized, or will it be up to the 75?
okay, I can respond to that. A request was made by Pastor Stan, and I agree with it. If the application was from 12, start at 12, to start it at 1 o'clock, what is also okay. I would rather, obviously, we are going to work with the Lutheran Church to make this work. So we are happy to accommodate if they would like there to be no activity until the church service is over. That's precisely what we're going to do, and that's a commitment that I've made, that we've made to the church, and obviously, as you can tell by this, they've made a commitment to us. We've made one to them, so we're happy about that.
Well, I wanted to raise that question because it wasn't clear what time their service concluded.
Yeah, and we can, I truth be told, I don't exactly know myself, but that's something that we can respond to, yes.
I mean, because they may have some meetings after church or, afternoon services. So that's why I raised that question.
I also have a question about the church. Is there any financial consideration being given to the church to use their parking lot?
We have not been asked to provide any financial assistance. So to answer your questions in both directions, we have not been asked, nor have we offered. However, I certainly would enter into the conversation, but to get something up and running is going to take quite an effort. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we help our side of the street and ourselves, and we also help the church at the same time? So, but to answer correctly your question directly, the answer is no.
Okay.
And who asked that question?
George.
George, okay.
Any other questions?
And you feel, just one last thing, you feel 100% confident that persons are going to pay attention and not monopolize the parking that's already on the streets of those senior citizens? That's really a concern, because everyone doesn't pay attention. Everyone doesn't follow the rules. Some people may not want to, go to the church to park if there's a space right there that is from something like for 612 or 60 in front of 607. So that is a concern because everyone does not pay attention. If the space is available, well, why not?
So
yeah.
So
that's my.
Okay. I actually have a question for Mr. Bach. Okay. I have a question for Mr. Bachmiller.
Yeah.
Yes. So on the other side of, we're on Washington Street, the other side, Washington Avenue. Are there parking spaces there? And the reason I'm asking is because I actually don't know. I always consider that kind of a dead zone. I never see any activity on that side. I realize it's a one-way street, so that also impacts sort of a community, flow. But are there parking spaces there as well that are not being utilized? At least that's my assumption, but that's more of a question than an answer.
I'm pretty sure there are parallel parking spaces on
Yes.
Washington Avenue.
On the south side,
It's on the south side of Washington Avenue
and then also.
Okay.
further down the north side.
and further down the
Okay.
street on the north side.
Right, so in reality, parking there is also, we would be happy to promote that, because keep in mind, my reference point is to walk several blocks without even, considering it to be out of the norm. So this is just on the other side of the point there. And so once again, that's also very close parking. It's very rarely used from what I can see. And I am looking at a photo of it right now, and I actually only see a handful of cars on the Washington Avenue side where, yeah. So,
And do keep in mind that those photographs are typically taken during the day.
right,
But the short answer is yes, there are parking spaces on the north, on Washington Avenue. My personal observation is that they're relatively lightly used when I go by, but I'm typically there during the day.
yeah.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay. All right, we will close the testimony portion of this particular appeal.
Mr. Chairman,
And-
before you do that, do you have anybody have any last questions of me on the procedures and the nuances of this particular issue?
Well, let's
I
make
don't
sure
have
we
it.
all get this right. So we're being asked to consider the use of St. Mark's parking in conjunction with this application to provide the necessary parking spaces under the ordinance. And if we decide to allow that in this RMED district, then parking is not an issue. They have the parking. Then we move to decide whether this particular establishment can be used as a brew pub under the special exception criteria. If we choose to vote that the use of the parking lot at the church is not appropriate, then we first consider the variance of whether, well, first, I guess we have to consider whether they can use the building under the special exception. And then we have to decide whether to grant, if we do that, are we going to just grant them a variance from the parking requirements? A complete variance, 0 parking being provided instead of the 30 required. In which case, if we approve the brew pub there, they would then have to, I guess they don't have to, their patrons have to find parking, which raises the concerns of the residents as to, especially as Mr. East pointed out, that he may find himself not able to park in front of his own home.
That's
If they're
correct.
taken-
And
if they're taken by
the variance and the special exception would kind of overlap one another in your deliberations. Because if you do, keep in mind, you have that interpretation of the zoning ordinance regarding the residential zoning of the parking lot. Once you get past that, if you decide to approve it, then, okay, that's going to be where the parking is proposed to be used, and you're saying that it's okay, but you still will need to weigh that into the, the Schultz versus Pritz. Is this any worse than anywhere else? Using that parking in that particular configuration at that distance in this particular situation. That's all.
Right. And I think as was also mentioned in your comments in the staff report, if we allow parking in a residential district to be used by property in a commercial area, then we're setting a precedent for all future potential applicants to do the same thing.
All potential uses in the city, not just this board.
In the city.
Yeah. If someone comes to my office after this decision is made and says, hey, I have this commercial use and it's in a commercial zoning district, I want to expand my parking lot, the property next door is zoned residential, but I want to put my parking there. as my understanding, I would have to tell them that that's okay.
Mm.
So that's a much far reaching situation.
Yeah.
that
Unless
may-
I'm advised otherwise by the city attorney, I will put that caveat on.
Okay. Yeah, because we could end up with an even worse situation than
I
we
mean,
have
if-
here.
if
So
the-
just something to
if-
consider.
If the city attorney says that is a too restrictive interpretation on my part, I will back away from that.
Okay. All right. Now, question for the board then. Is that something we would want to have known before we deliberate? What the position of the city attorney would be with regard to what the last thing Steve just mentioned?
I would think.
Do we think that we have to get an interpretation that says, is it going to be for any, that if we rule this way, that the parking lot can be used at the church, is that going to bind us or bind the city from similar types of requests in the future? Or will it only be limited to this case?
I think we would need clarification that it's just for this case.
I think that is a pretty serious thing. Normally, when we hear applications, there's not really a lot of precedential value that carries to other appeals. It's on the facts of that particular case. But in this situation, if we decide to grant the parking variance to be used at the church, it could have long-lasting implications for other property owners. Doesn't mean we don't necessarily, we would.
I don't see how it wouldn't set a precedence, and that's more reason to get clarification from the city attorney.
If so, I mean, I don't know if there would be benefit to going ahead and deliberating the other aspects of this particular matter and
I don't
leave
think we
that.
can do that to get an answer to that question. If you feel you need that kind of a guidance from the city attorney, that's really kind of the first question you need to give yourself an answer to before you can move on to the other
Yeah.
one.
Okay. Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I think that that's too important of an issue to leave aside, because it may influence our ultimate decision one way or the other.
All right, if that's the desire of the board, your staff would recommend to you that you would close your hearing, leave the record open for advice from the city attorney, and then deliberate either at a special meeting we would set up or the next meeting, which we may or may not have, because you know how many applications we get in these days. It'd be kind
And
of,
I'd certainly, and I think
you already have one for next month, so there will be a meeting next month where you could schedule a special meeting since everybody's doing it from their homes anyway.
I'm certainly sympathetic to the applicant's timeline for the business. I don't want to hold this up so long that they start losing opportunities as we get closer and closer to the summer. So I think if we do, we would want to try, if possible, to have a special meeting and resolve this as quickly as possible, depending on what the city attorney's circumstances are, if they are able to address this quickly.
Does anyone have the city attorney's phone number?
I do.
I'm texting them right now.
At 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night.
8:19.
Thank you.
I don't see why we couldn't have a special meeting for this, especially using
Right,
Zoom.
right.
And unless anybody's got a work conflict, which a lot of people don't these days, it doesn't necessarily have to be at 7 o'clock in the evening either. It could be during the workday.
This is true.
Sure. Now, do we need to leave this open for public participation, that special meeting?
You're just looking to get legal guidance from the city
Okay.
attorney on a legal matter. All your testimony's been provided.
Okay, got it. Great. I just want to make sure. Okay, so is it the opinion of the board that we would want to hold this off, get the resolution of that question from the city attorney, and then try to reschedule a special meeting, leaving the matter open until we complete our special meeting.
Do you need
I
a
agree.
motion to that effect?
What's that, Jordy?
Do you need a motion to that effect?
Yeah, I think so. So I'll ask for a motion to postpone our deliberations until we get the question resolved by the city attorney, whether approving the use of the church parking lot would become a permanent type of situation for future applicants or not.
Mr. Chairman, I would want to make sure that we couch the language to the city attorney in more generalized terms.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to this specific thing. The question is going to be, whatever your decision is, how does that affect the zoning administrator, or how does that affect you all in future variance applications? And then second, how does that affect the city zoning administrator in other circumstances? I would keep it as a general legal inquiry.
I concur that we do want to expand that, so that's good.
And so I'll make the motion that we postpone our deliberations until we get further guidance from the city attorney, with the understanding that we'll have a special meeting as soon as possible.
Second, do I have a
I
second?
second.
Thank you, Janice. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, gentlemen, thank you. We appreciate your patience. As you can imagine, this is kind of a unique situation for us too. And we will get back. I'm sure the zoning administrator will get back in touch with you and let you know as soon as possible that we'll be able to reconvene and complete our deliberations once we have the answer from the city attorney.
We'll try to get this resolved within days. I mean, I'm not going to drag this out for weeks or anything.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. All right. We will proceed to our second and final hearing then. Make sure there's Mr. Kozinski. Okay.
Hello.
This is case number Z 2020-03. Applicant Harold E. Walter. Mr. Bachmiller, if you'll give us a brief summary.
Okay, before we do that, Ed, can you hear us?
I can.
Okay,
I have Mr. Walter here with me. I assume you can see him.
Yes.
Okay.
okay, this is case Z 2020-03. The applicant is Harold E. Walter. The property is located in the RO Residential Office Zoning District. Site's located also in the Potomac Broadway Historic District. This is site location is 418 Ballard Street, which is actually an accessory structure on the rear of the property at 417 North Potomac Street. The request is for a special exception to establish a hair salon at the property designated as 418 Ballard Street, behind 417 North Potomac, zoned RO, located in the Potomac Broadway Local Historic District. This application is being made for the reason under Article 4, Section Z, a hair salon is a special exception use in the RO zoning district. Deadline for a written decision is June 6th. That assumes that you actually deliberate. The deadlines, by the way, that doesn't apply to the previous case because you haven't technically done your deliberation yet. But in this case, I assume it'll move forward tonight and it'll be June 6th. Staff report special exception. You have your general criteria for your 6 general criteria for the approvals of special exceptions. And then also there are certain uses that are special exception uses that are subject to specific performance criteria. A hair salon in the RO zoning district is one of them. That's item 7 on page 2 of your staff report. The business use shall not exceed 1,000 square feet of floor area. The building in which it's located is less than 1,000 square feet. Property shall be located on a collector street or higher. North Potomac Street is classified as an arterial street. Number 3, shall be permitted only in a multifamily mixed use or non-residential building. The applicant or his attorney is going to need to explain their justification on this criterion. It's staff's understanding that the salon will be an area segregated from the dwelling part of the building. So I guess they're going to make the argument that since it's got a dwelling and then a separate area for a business, that makes it a mixed use building. But I'll leave that to Mr. Kozinski to talk about. And then item 4, a plan for signs shall be submitted to the board. A plan for signage was not included with the application. My understanding is that, however, they really don't want any signage. But again, I'll defer to Mr. Kozinski on that. The HDC, we consulted the HDC. They had no particular issue on this being in the historic district, other than any exterior changes to the property to move this forward, such as if there was to be signage, that all is subject to review and approval by the HDC, like any other change to a property in the historic district. And I want to also follow up at the end of page 3 of your staff report, you have an issue of a non-conforming second dwelling. The carriage house dwelling is the second dwelling on the lot, which makes it a non-conformity due to recent text amendments that limit dwelling structures in most cases to one per lot. Once changed to a permitted use, a non-conformity is not allowed to be reinstituted. However, in this case, only part of the non-conformity is being extinguished, the salon area, and the non-conforming dwelling will continue, albeit reduced in size. By converting this part of the building to a hair salon, the applicant is advised that if in the future there's a desire to discontinue the hair salon and reincorporate it into the remaining non-conforming dwelling, the owner will need to either create a separate lot for the carriage house, or they will need to apply to the Board of Zoning Appeals for an expansion of a non-conforming use, being that second dwelling on the property. It's kind of a technicality of sorts. And it really doesn't impact whether or not to approve it today. It's just advising the applicant in the future. Recommended conditions: should the board find the applicant has met the criteria and determines to approve the special exception, the Planning and Code Administration Department recommends the following conditions. 1, the use shall be in accordance with the testimony provided at the hearing. That's pretty much a standard. And 2, signage shall comply with the zoning ordinances, regulations on signage, and a certificate of appropriateness shall be obtained from the Historic District Commission. That's all I have.
I can't hear Mr. Katika.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. All right, if the applicant would raise his hand, do you solemnly promise to declare under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you are about to give this board shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kaczynski, if you could state your name for the record and your connection to the applicant.
Yes. My name is Edward Kaczynski. My business address is 55 North Jonathan Street. I am an attorney in Hagerstown, practicing actively in Washington County for 40 years. I represent Mr. Walter in his request for a special exception in this matter. Mr. Walter is the occupant of 418 Ballard Street. He lives in a structure that has been referred to as the carriage house on that property. Mr. and Mrs. Carroll own the property which fronts Potomac Street. Mr. Walter, in moving to this location, discovered that there's a portion of the property which is not accessible through his residence, but is accessible from the outside, that pretty much was a storage area or storage room before he moved there. I think he's used it sort of initially as a laundry area, but he is a retired or semi-retired cosmetologist. He operated a very active business across the street on Potomac Street. It was a salon and spa that he operated there for many years. However, he would like to continue with his profession and operate on a part-time basis a salon out of the 12 by 16 foot area of the carriage house, which is identified in our exhibits. And if you look at exhibit number 9, hopefully everybody has the packet. It shows the kind of the interplay between the house and then what is designated as the studio. And you can see it's a 12 by 16 area. There's a door that is from the exterior in with a couple of windows, and there will be a bathroom. It'll be a 1 chair, 1 bowl, I guess 2 chairs, 2 seating chairs. Mr. Walter has indicated to me, and he'll testify to the effect that he intends to do this on an appointment only basis. There will be no walk-ins. It is strictly so he can continue to serve his clientele that, or at least a number of his clientele that he's established over the years. He does not intend to utilize any signage. Parking is not an issue. This actually has more off-street parking than the last hearing, but he has actually 4 to 5 parking spaces. If you look at the supplemental exhibits that we filed, which is actually exhibit number 11, that is a picture that was taken 2 days ago that shows the area next to the brick driveway or walk that shows some gravel that has been installed. The landlord actually did that for him to help improve his personal parking, but also to make sure that there's adequate space for anybody that would be utilizing the anticipated granting of a special exception. There wasn't a presumption that that would occur, but they just thought that instead of parking on the grass, which is what he was doing, that it just made more sense to turn it into an actual parking area. Nevertheless, as Mr. Bachmiller, I guess I can address that now, but Mr. Bachmiller has indicated that one of the special criteria is that the building or the structure is a multi-family mixed use or non-residential building. Well, obviously, it's not a multifamily building. I mean, the property is multifamily because it is not a non-residential building because it is a residential structure and has been for many, many years. So conformity or non-conformity, there's really not much change in the non-conformity aspect because the residential part is in that area that's designated house. However, our approach to the mixed use is, I think, what Mr. Bachmiller alluded to, which is once the special exception is granted, or hopefully is granted, then the combination with the residents now makes it a mixed use building. This is a bit of a chicken egg argument. So, and the zoning ordinance as it currently exists in connection with these types of uses does create a bit of a catch-22, but this is really the equivalent of what I would say is the older, and I guess it's still theirs, but your home occupation. Mr. Walter lives here. He doesn't have any direct access from his actual living quarters into the salon, but once the salon, if the special exception would be granted and he starts commencement of business there, then he'll have the mixed use, and we believe that meets the criteria under the ordinance. That would be a bit of we believe that not to allow it in that way would create too much of a strict constructionist approach to the zoning ordinance, which is to try to promote and support reasonable use of land, not to restrict the use. This particular use certainly is not going to be a high traffic situation. The access to it will be off of Ballard Street. There are photographs of Ballard Street that show that it is with or without cars. It's a one-way street, but it's a fairly wide street. And I think staff will tell you it's an alley, but it is called Ballard Street, and it is wide enough for a car to easily pass through. And when there's no cars on the spot, it's essentially almost as wide as a 2-lane road. It is one way, and but it still is easy access, I believe, off of Church Street and then out to North Street. And it is an easy pull into the parking, as you can see from the photographs. So I apologize for rambling on, but I probably should introduce you here to Mr. Walter and let him explain to you what his intent here is, and so that if the board would have any questions for him or I, then we can move in that direction. Mr. Walter, we've already indicated you live at 418 Ballard Street. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
How long have you lived there?
Since August.
Okay. And are you a licensed cosmetologist in the state of Maryland?
Yes.
And how long have you been engaged in that profession?
For 40 years.
And you previously owned a business that was of a larger nature. Is that correct?
Yes, Tranquility Salon and Spa.
And where was that located?
400 North Potomac Street.
In Hagerstown.
Yes.
So that literally was a
pretty much across the street from
Yes.
this location?
1997, I bought the building.
Okay, and you have since stopped doing business in that, is that correct?
I sold the building, and yes, the business, yes.
Okay, and so do you have requested a special exception prior to you occupying the carriage house? How many people or who lived there? Do you know?
In the carriage house, it was just one person for
Okay.
years.
And are you the only person who lives there now?
Yes, yes, sir.
And so describe for the board what your plan is for the operation of a salon if you are granted the special exception.
Well, it's going to be just myself. I will have no employees. It will be by appointments, clients I've been doing for 30 years. And it's like one person in, one person out. And I plan to work probably 5 more years. And it's just to slow out my career. And I live it's nice to live there and work there. I do have some health issues, so it has to be close to my home so I can actually rest a couple of hours during the day. So, it's just a very, very low key business. I don't even need a sign. My clients are very dedicated. They're all professional, nice people. So it's would be very convenient. And like I said, it's going to be very, very, very low key.
What would be the days, your anticipated days of operation?
Just Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday from maybe 9 till 6, and Saturday mornings 9 to 1, and that's it.
And do you intend to have any signage?
No, it's not necessary. And my clients are. It's like a personal thing with my own clients.
Now, I've already discussed exhibit number 9 with the board, which I'm showing you.
Yes.
Is this an accurate layout of the facility once it would be improved for
Yes.
use as a salon?
Yes, it was actually my laundry room and a storage room. It already had like a toilet and a sink and a washer and dryer and a laundry sink. So basically, there's no plumbing to do. And I would just paint it and just make it decorated.
Okay. And then exhibit 10 says 418 Ballard Street, and it has blue and white. What were you intending to show with that particular picture?
The house, the studio is in white, and the blue is the driveway off of Ballard and the parking in the back, which is approximately 4 to 5 spaces.
Okay. And so if we lead then into picture number 11, does that show then the parking area that you
Yes.
shaded in blue?
Yes, that was actually taken yesterday.
So how many parking spaces are actually available for use if for either your residential purposes or the salon?
Probably 4 spaces. And plus a parking space for me.
Okay, so there's a
Additional.
total of 5 spaces in that area.
Yes, sir. And I have been a part of the community I bought the building in 97. I've been working in that same building since 1998, and I've restored the building, and I love being a part of the community. That's why I'm still here.
Okay. Have you spoken to your neighbors regarding your request?
Yes.
And have you received any objection?
None.
To your knowledge?
None to our knowledge.
Right. And in fact, you're the property owner of of where you live and have provided letters of support. Is that correct?
Yes, and neighbors on each side.
Okay. And so that would be David and Ginger Pembroke. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And they have provided support. And then also Samuel Strauss.
Yes, that's right on the corner. Yes.
Okay, so so your immediate adjacent property owners neighbors have provided a letter of support for you.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
How would you describe the access from Ballard? I mean,
It's a wide street. People actually park the whole way along that street, and there's still room for cars to go in and out.
is it one way or two way?
It's one way.
And if people are coming, it's one way starting from Church Street?
From I think Church Street, and it goes over to forget what street it is.
To North Avenue or
North Avenue, and then the next street,
Okay.
Randolph. No, it's not Randolph. I'm not sure the name of the street.
But as far as gaining entrance to the area where the salon would be, would there be any difficulty in anyone
No,
turning
it's a,
on or off of Ballard Street to get to your
no, it's a
anticipated
big,
shop?
it's a wide driveway and it goes right into the back of the property.
I have no other questions. I would like to make sure that if I haven't already, that I would move the index of the applicant's exhibits together with the exhibits that are marked 1 through, well, they should have been marked 1 through 14 or 13. Actually, the Strouth letter was added after we submitted the packet to the board. So I'm not sure whether that's been added or not, but
It is there.
it is there. So that would have to be marked as exhibit 14. So I'd just like to move those into the record.
If there's no
and just
objection from the board.
Mathematically, we'd point out 12 by 16 is 192 square feet, which is clearly less than the 1,000 limitation on this type of request. Okay, I have no other questions for Mr. Walter. If the board would have any questions, would welcome those at this point.
Okay, are we all off mute?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you, Mr. Kaczynski and Mr. Walter, for the presentation. Anyone have any specific questions at this point?
Well, I just have one. Is there something already in place to filter out any odors from chemicals used?
There's an exhaust fan there, yes.
Okay.
You don't use any chemicals that require any special permits or?
No, just hair color. I don't even do relaxers or anything.
And if I was clear on your testimony, you actually have to leave your house, go outside and come in the front door to access the space?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And the door and the window, there's one window in the salon space and one window in the bathroom, right?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay. Will this business require, Mr. Kaczynski, maybe you know this, will this business require any kind of like a fire inspection prior to?
He certainly is going to have to comply with any building code requirements, health department, and if that would require a fire marshal inspection, I think that will happen when he actually gets his license.
Not
as a
that
shop.
we would, not that we could require it or anything. I was just looking at the configuration and you see this, the chair is in the very back of the salon and the window and the door is way up front. And typically, you need 2 access points, if there's a fire. So I mean, it is a small space. So you
Right,
get to the door
it's
without
12,
much
it's
trouble.
12 by 16. So
It's like a large living room.
yeah.
Okay. All right. And then in your application, it was you noted that North Potomac was a collector street, and Mr. Bachmiller's staff report says it's an arterial street.
Well, I think, and I'll stand corrected if Mr. Bachmiller has corrected me. I think the one of the requirements here is that the property be located on a collector or arterial street. I think that I don't want to offer whether I'm right or wrong, but I think the collector street is probably, the arterial street is certainly a more significant street. But we're not saying that the access is occurring off of Potomac Street, but one of the special conditions is that the property itself be connected to, I believe, if he used arterial, I thought it was collector street, but either way, I don't think that's a hang up in this particular situation because I believe it meets the special criteria based upon the staff report that's been submitted. The only question mark that Mr. Bachmiller raised was leaving me to assert to the board my rationale on the mixed use aspect of the building. And I just would assert that that's a reasonable interpretation if we're attempting to promote this type of activity or use within that part of town, which I see mean, clearly you can have a full-fledged salon across the street. There
Mm.
certainly doesn't seem to be any reason why a semi-retired person like Mr. Walter shouldn't be able to conduct his profession or trade there. Truthfully, if he didn't need a bowl or a chair, he could probably have his business there with no problem,
Right.
just like you or I.
Yep.
But his profession does require a couple of special tools.
Chairman, the ordinance requires that the property, I emphasize the property, not the building, the property needs to front on a comprehensive plan, collector or arterial street. So whether it's a collector or arterial, it meets the requirement. It just can't be on a local street, which it is not.
Good.
So
Okay, great.
property fronts, it meets the requirements. The property front, the collector or arterial.
Thank you.
And of course, the other area is the signage, and he's not, does not intend to use a sign. We've answered that question several times from staff, and he understands that if he would change that aspect, then he would have to approach the city to get permission for signage. But that's why you don't see a signage plan, because he doesn't plan on putting one up.
Thank you. All right. Is there anyone in opposition? Anybody has identified?
No one has been vetted as an opponent in this case, so we have none.
And there's no written things have been received?
No.
Okay, great. All right. Any questions for the applicant other than what we've already discussed?
No, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
No. The only thing I would say in summary is that I think that that there's nothing that would be adverse or materially adverse to the use of the property. It's in harmony with the spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance, and that this is certainly a very low intensity use that he's requesting, and that we would request that you grant the special exception as requested.
Okay. One thing I do want to ask, the situation regarding the nonconformity and the need, if Mr. Walter were to abandon his use of the carriage house as the salon, that it could not be used again as a dwelling.
Mr. Chairman, actually,
unless petitioned for an expansion of the
No, I think the nonconformity is now. I heard Mr. Bachmiller stepping in, but I think the nonconformity is the residential aspect, because the nonconformity is you can at that zoning now you can only have one dwelling unit per property. So if the dwelling aspect would be abandoned, then they would lose the non-conforming aspect. If he would cease using it as a salon, then the special exception would lapse, I guess, at some point, and someone else might have to come in. But
it couldn't be used as a dwelling again.
Well, it could probably
without dividing the property.
I can provide some clarification on that. When I wrote the staff report, I was under the impression that the area being used as a salon is part of the dwelling now.
Okay.
By this testimony, I'm finding out that's not the case. So actually, I need to amend what I said earlier because it's not part of the dwelling now.
Okay.
I understand that he's walking around the outside. It's essentially an accessory if he's using it for laundry or whatever. But there's no interior access now, so I really can't call it part of the dwelling. But if for some reason, and this is really not even for Mr. Walter, this would be for the Carrolls or any subsequent property owner, if the hair salon went away and they wanted to incorporate that area into the dwelling, that would require an expansion of the non-conforming use. But again, it's really kind of informational, doesn't really have any impact on what's in front of you tonight.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you for that clarification. Okay. Any other questions from the board members?
No.
Okay, then we will close the testimony portion of this hearing, and we will move into deliberations if everybody is prepared to do that.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we have the specific, let's talk about the specific requirements for a hair salon establishment in the RO zoning district. We had 4 criteria here. Business shall not exceed 1,000 square feet of floor area. It's clear that this doesn't, so that is met. property shall be located on a collector street or higher. Mr. Bachmiller has clarified for us previously that that is the case. Shall be permitted only in a multifamily, mixed use, or non-residential building. We'll hold that for a second. The fourth one, a plan for signs submitted. One has not been submitted, and the applicant has expressed that he understands if he does choose to use signs, he would have to approach the city to get approval for any signage in the future, including I believe, the Historic District Commission. So back to the third criteria, shall be permitted only in a multifamily, mixed use, or non-residential building. Does it meet that criteria? It's not, I don't think could be considered multifamily because these are two separate structures. The Carroll's property and Mr. Walters' property are separate. Is it mixed use? Mr. Walter does live in a part of the building and would be operating a salon on the outside portion connected to the parking area. It would become mixed use if he used it that way. And it's not a non-residential building. So I guess that's the question for us is, does this satisfy the mixed use portion of this? Any thoughts on that?
Then everybody speak at once.
Yeah. I think our brains are churning on that question a little bit.
I don't really see any problem with his intended use.
And it is in an area segregated from the dwelling, not only by design, but by access. So, and you can't really use that portion as it would be hard to use a 12 by 16 room as a separate dwelling. Be kind of tiny. I guess maybe nothing more than maybe a studio apartment at best.
That would
artist studio. What's that?
That wouldn't meet zoning requirements.
Yeah, that's true. Is there a definition of mixed use in the zoning ordinance? Let's take a look.
Stand by. Mixed use building. A building that contains at least one floor devoted to permitted non-residential uses and at least one developed allowed residential uses.
Yeah, it's interesting how the definitions always seem to make things more complicated.
Or mixed use structure, a structure that is intended for use for a mixture of non-residential and residential uses in the same structure.
Intended for. I would tend to think that this is intended for because it doesn't have access from the rest of the building. So it's not like somebody intended to use this to be able to just walk without going outside into that portion. Intended for. used or intended. I think that an argument could be made that it, although it isn't used currently, it could be intended for use of a mixture of non-residential and residential uses. I mean, he's not having to make any changes to the plumbing, not having to make any changes to the access from outside. There's sufficient parking. Roll in a chair and you're good to go. So I think
it sounds like mixed use.
I think so too. I think that could be an intended use. Okay. Anybody else see it that way or have any objections to that interpretation?
No, I agree with it.
I agree.
Okay. All right, thanks. Okay, now let's jump back into the other criteria. Okay. Okay, the first is characteristics and use and operation of the property in question as proposed will not create any greater adverse impact than the operation of such a use on any other property with the same zoning. I think Mr. Walter has addressed that in the fact that he's only operating 4 days a week, limited hours on Saturday, by appointment only, one at a time. So it's not much more different than having somebody come over your house as a guest. I think one car and coming and going every couple of times a day is not. I have more cars than that coming in and out of my house, and I don't even see clients here. So I think that wouldn't cause any traffic or certainly exhaust problems from vehicles. He's not installing any additional lighting. He's not going to have any signage. Not using hazardous chemicals. No noise to speak of. I mean, hair dryers operate in every residential home without complaint. So in my opinion, it would not create any greater adverse impact than what such a use on other properties would cause. And it also seems like it will comply with conditions and requirements for the specific use of a hair salon. Specific conditions of approval. And we talked about having already having any signage be approved in advance by the City and Historic District Commission, and that he will have to use this property in accordance with the testimony he's provided. If he decides to do something different, he would have to come back to us and ask for an expanded use or substantially different use if he chose to do so. We're not changing from one special exception use to another at this time. No variances. And I think that satisfies all the criteria. Anyone else have any comments or anything to add? Positive or negative?
I vote that we approve the variance as stated.
You mean the special exception?
The special exception as stated.
Do I have a second?
I would second that.
Any further discussion?
Will your motion include any conditions?
The condition that the signage.
Yeah, the signage was laid out in his presentation. Do we need to specify that?
Yeah, I would say it would have to be included. So any use not in conformity with what has been expressed by the applicant in this hearing, or any signage that would be desired to add to the exterior of the property in any way, or along the road or the driveway. All those would have to be addressed by us with a secondary, any change to that would have to be addressed through us or through the zoning administrator first, for approval.
Mr. Chairman, could I make a recommendation just to keep things simple?
Sure.
I would suggest that if you're going to move to approve it, put a condition on that look at number 2 condition on your staff report. That way, if down the road he decides he wants a sign, or if he moves on and somebody else comes in and does the same thing, they want a sign.
Right.
They don't have to come back to this body over a sign.
Oh, I see. So they would have to come before the Historic District Commission
Yeah.
and comply with the ordinance.
I mean, because we don't have that condition. and
That's
then
true.
Down the road, they want a sign that deviates from what the testimony is, and they got to come back to this body over a sign, and that's pretty pointless.
Right. I understand. Yeah. We'll make it more narrow than that. So he would have to comply with the ordinance's regulation on signage and get a certificate of appropriateness from the Historic District Commission. Jordy, would you agree to amend your motion to that effect?
I certainly do.
And Greg, you still second that as amended?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Any further discussion by the board?
And for the record, we did lose Ms. Kelch. Somehow she got dropped off the call.
Okay. So that leaves 4 board members to vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Against? 4-0. It passes. Thank you, Mr. Krasinski, Mr. Walter. We appreciate it, and good luck with your business. If they waited. I see Ed's still there, but I don't hear him. All right. I think that's all we have to address today. We will wait for Mr. Bachmiller and Ms. Calhoun to reach out to the city attorney and ask for their opinion on the previous hearing issue, and let us know proposed date and time for reconvening for a special meeting.
I would assume that none of you would have a problem with meeting during the day.
That's fine with me.
Yeah, I typically don't have a problem.
No
Okay.
problem.
All right, and I'm not looking to drag this out. We'll get an answer from the city attorney quickly and get a follow-up meeting scheduled so we can get this done.
Great.
Great.
I think this went very well. Thanks to all of you for setting it up this way, and your support guy over there, I can't see you. Lean forward. There you go. Thanks for getting this all good. And I think we're getting to be pros at this, so next time should be even smoother. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Good
Do
night.
we need a motion to adjourn?
Yep. Go ahead, Jordy.
Motion to adjourn.
Second? All in favor?
Second.
Approved. Yay.
Okay, we're out.
Good man. Bye-bye.